I think it's important to start off to share a little bit of my background. So, because certainly all of it, as Michelle said, speaks to what I'm doing, where I'm coming from, and how my journey is evolving. Even right now, here I am. I didn't think I'd be in this space, but I am. So I grew up in Sarnia, which is not that far down the 402. I attended Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, and I did my undergrad there. I went to Teachers College. I ended up teaching elementary school in Detroit for 5 years. And then after that, I met the love of my life, well, during that, and he happened to play semi-pro hockey, so we ended up in South Carolina for a year, came back to Canada, moved to Brampton, I taught in Brampton, and then I came back here and I taught here in London as well. While I was in Brampton, yoga came into my life, and it completely changed my life because I had suffered traumas in my earlier years, and what I found was that I was fortunate enough that the first teacher I had was from India, and so the yoga I experienced was the true classical traditional yoga, which is more than just the physical postures that we focus on here in the West. So through my journey and seeing the power of how this approach to life was changing me, it caused me to dive deeper into that. I've traveled to India, I've studied with swamis, I have studied with different yogi masters that are in their 70s, defy aging, have a really great understanding of the body, the mind, and the soul. And they taught me so many things about resiliency, about understanding that phrase, know thyself, and that's an ongoing process. And certainly, just the benefits of mental, emotional, and physical health of the practice. So I bring those pieces in, and it's all going to tie in quite nicely. As you can see, by up until COVID, I would be considered a visible minority, and I'm going to talk about language later, but that's what you notice about me first. So I will share a little bit of that story when it's a little more appropriate, and I think that's also something that speaks to what I have to share. Just this past week, I have had the absolute privilege to begin studying with Dr. Bernice A. King, who is the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so I am learning Dr. King's methodology and also what his bigger vision was and living that. So I'm going to be touching on that today as well. And again, I'm really privileged, and I'm really happy that you are all here to start this journey. Also, I think it's important to know that I've done extensive travel. So I've been to Thailand, I've been to India, Jamaica, Hawaii, and the Bahamas, and not on resort. So I travel as a local, I stay with the locals, and I try to learn from the locals too. So that's also going to come into what I have to share today. So welcome to Eradicating Racism, Finding the Path Forward. And I'm going to start with our guiding question, which was, as nonprofit leaders already committed to social change, what exactly are you being called to do in order for true systemic transformation to take place in the way of race, in the way of humanity? And I would say that, as we get ready to almost fully open up again, the days of passivity and inaction are over, and we must put forth a great and consistent effort. And what you're going to learn today is that what you have been doing has been good up until now, but we're going to be asking you to dig in deeper, and that this topic that we're talking on touches on all humanity. So the path that I'm about to show you will address all of the inequities and injustices in society, but through the lens of race and what we've been through just recently together. Certainly that will be the focus, but please know that this addresses everybody, who experiences discrimination, oppression, and marginalization. So where are we going? Well, we start at the end. Where do we want to end up? And you'll see that it's going to be a theme of remembering and reuniting. I think we have to have a compelling collective vision to move us forward. And I propose that it's our diverse human family coexisting harmoniously with deep mutual respect for each other and our planet. I think that's something we can get behind. Can I get a thumbs up if you would say that's a pretty good collective mission or vision to follow under? Now, all of you have vision and missions for your organizations. Have you thought about a collective vision that all of humanity is working for, and how your organization is feeding into that collective vision? The other piece to that is that usually when we set our mission and visions, these are things that we think about, well, this is the big grand goal, and it's not something that we can accomplish in this lifetime, but we're going to work toward it. Because if we accomplish it, then why exist, right? That's what we're told. And the exact opposite is true when it comes to this particular vision for all of humanity, because we have to start working at it right now and living as if right now our human family is coexisting harmoniously. We have to start showing up at that capacity right now. So what does that mean? It means starting from the individual level. So how can I show up in a way that expresses this mission on a daily basis? And then from there, how can I express this mission in my family, in my neighborhood, in all the different organizations and subcultures that I'm a part of? And then from there, you know, it's about how do we move this particular vision forward into our community of business, into our politics, and into the nonprofit sector. And then that grows into how do we then join with other communities who are doing the same thing. And then from there it grows into how do we do that with other provinces, other nations, until it becomes a global thing. So it's really working from the inside out. And this is not something to think about off in the far distant, that it won't be accomplished in your lifetime. Act as though if it can be accomplished in this lifetime, starting today. And then we have the collective mission. So what is the work right now in between time? And it's certainly, part of it is that anti-racist movement, but it's dismantling the systems that uphold white and patriarchal supremacy, as well as other narratives that divide and or degrade the human family. So today you're going to really hear me focus on the word human family. And I really want you to start wrapping your mind around that, so that everything you do is reflecting that you are part of the human family. And to drive that message home, this little picture that I have up here, right there, this is my family. This is my two daughters when they were younger. This is actually at a family reunion with family from Montreal. So our family's bilingual. I'm not, my children are. But certainly, as you can see, we literally are an embodiment of that ultimate goal. We have Korean, English, Czech, Irish, Jamaican, and French. All in this beautiful family, and we are actual blood relatives. So just to show that this is an idea of living together as intimately as a family. And I must say too that some people think of a utopian version of this, that means that there's going to be no conflict. Absolutely not. Where there's human, there's going to be conflict. It's just the approach is what changes how we manage conflict and how we manage each other. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So how do we get there? Well, first, I would like to start by sharing one particular lesson. And this is where another important story comes in, is that there's no such thing as race. Despite what you've been taught, despite what we have been conditioned to believe, There is no such thing as race. So I'll give you two resources that are, I'd say, pretty credible when it comes to defending that statement. One is the work of Dr. Spencer Wells. So he's a part of the Human Genome Project. And up until the 70s, scientists have been studying humans and attributing characteristics, abilities, intelligence, skill level, you name it, to skin color. And what Spencer Wells' work has done, which is actually study the genetic markers of the human family, he has found that that is an absolute farce, that you cannot attribute anything to skin color, that it is not, race is not an inherent genetic marker. In fact, it's nothing more than hair color, eye color. It's another physical attribute, but it is nothing to distinguish between one human or another. So he actually came out and said that race is a fiction. Race is not a genetic marker. And he has proven that we have all come from the same genetic family tree. There's a documentary that I'll refer to later called The Journey of Man, which I highly recommend you watch, and certainly look him up and research into his work. And the other experience I'd like to share is a personal one. So I was raised by my mother, who is white, and my stepfather, who was also white. And I did not meet my biological father till I was 19, who is Jamaican. So I'm biracial by traditional standards, what they would say. And the interesting part about that was I did not know that my stepfather was not my father. I had to be told at the age of 9. So what does that mean? I think I'm a pretty intelligent person, I think, but if you look at children, we all come into this world and we are not born to distinguish people or have preferences based on race. We have to be taught about race. So I literally, even though I knew my skin color was different from my parents, I didn't know that my dad was not my dad. And the other important thing to know is that when I was told, the first things that came out of my mouth were, can I still call him dad? And does he still love me? Those are the most two important things, and I will never forget that I needed to know. The race part in my life didn't come until I was a teenager, when we start to learn about our identity and who we are in the world, and then also responding to the stories of how the world thinks we should be. So that's when I realized that race was super important. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't have issues growing up and I wasn't called derogatory names or treated differently by other people. To be honest with you, while it hurt, I didn't understand it because I wasn't raised that. I literally was not raised that way. So I didn't understand the game of race until I had to learn it in my teens and adulthood. So those are certainly important lessons to walk away with today, that race is nothing more than a physical attribute like eye color or hair color. And also, I think moving away today is language. So if we're talking language of the human family, we have to realize that when we're talking about people, it's going to be tricky and awkward, but to talk about skin color, then talk about hair color, talk about eye color. That's not an actual marker for people. Words like inclusiveness, minority, marginalization, these all are race words. These are words that we use that reflect that division within humanity. And so we need to start thinking again, and it was around, we did this before, brothers and sisters, right? That we are brothers and sisters. We are part of a family tree. So if I see someone, that's my brother, that's my sister, there's an acknowledgement that we are somehow distantly related. And in my travels, it's not uncommon in India, in Thailand, in Hawaii, even Jamaica, people call each other aunties. If they're older than you, aunties or uncles. that's what you call everybody to show that there's a little bit more wisdom there, but there's still relation, auntie or uncle. So it's just starting to rethink about how our language reflects how we see each other. And I'm proposing we see it as part of a family. And the proposed collective strategy really is just becoming better human beings and using the examples of two outstanding leaders that really loved humanity and worked hard for the equality and justice for all, Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And what I love about these two is that while for a while they were put up on this big pedestal, almost like demigods, if you will, the reality is that they too had their flaws. The Black Lives Matter movement right now is having issue with Gandhi. Up at Carlton, they want to remove his statue. In Leicester, England, they want to also remove the statue because he was recorded as making racially biased statements. Now, those are early in his career, and as you will see as we go into the path, Gandhi was someone who came to the conclusion that that equality and justice was truly for all, and to slight one human being is to slight all of us. Martin Luther King was known to have infidelity in his marriage, and not that we're promoting these things, but I think one of the reasons a lot of us fell off the moral high ground, if you will, is because there was a fall. We all recognize we have flaws, we're humans, we have shortcomings. And once we put ourselves up to try to have higher moral grounds, it's going to be easy to tear us down. We see that in the political arena. But as you're going to see, both of these human beings were highly committed to becoming better human beings on a continuous basis. The path that they were on gave them no alternative. So if Martin Luther King were to be alive, I would say he would probably atone for his shortcomings as a husband, and he would do better. And that's the path that we have to recognize, that that's what we need to realize, that we're all going to have our own shortcomings, but this is a path of commitment to overcoming those obstacles and becoming better human beings along the way. And so it's not an either or situation, but rather that both and. So I can do that, and I can make prolific change in the world and still be an amazing human being. So let's take a look at Gandhi's approach. So his influences were the Bhagavad Gita, which is a beautiful Vedantic text. So Vedanta predates Hinduism, and Vedanta is not a religion, but a way of life. The Bhagavad Gita basically was a conversation that was showing a beautiful living philosophy, but it never laid out one path that everybody must take. In fact, what it did is it gave a direction and left it to everybody to be able to walk that path and have their own experiences, but come to the same conclusions. And so in the yoga world, Vedanta and yoga predate Hinduism, and it is not a religion, it is a path, a way of being. And so the jewels of yoga and the jewels of the methodology of Gandhi were self-examination, self-discipline, self-realization, and selfless service. That self-examination piece, you know, checking in with your thoughts and your speech, your actions, challenging all of your thoughts, your speech, your actions, questioning everything you ever think you know all the time. So it's not just you know, I'm going to do this week. This is a lifetime commitment to always be, am I getting that right? Is that it's a constant in the back of your mind, self-examination of your beliefs and your thoughts and your stories and how the world is operating and the beliefs and the thoughts collectively. Self-discipline is monitoring and then changing constantly any beliefs that you have that are incorrect. So you can see that there's a deep sense of truth-seeking about yourself and about the world around you, and also a humility, because you recognize that as you're doing this, there are people that are maybe also doing this. So you're connecting with people who are like-minded and have a similar approach to the world, but then you're also appreciative of the people that do not practice these methods, and you can see the results of that. And so you know what you're dealing with, but you can still appreciate everybody's perspective. Self-realization. So again, know thyself. In the yoga world, yoga actually is union with the individual self with a higher self, or the universal self. And in fact, in yoga, you will see often this mudra, you see this a lot. So everything is energy, it's the idea of a circuit, but also in the yoga world, this finger right here represents ego. And it's the one that's always pointing and blaming and shaming. It's the one that causes a lot of trouble in the world, and it thinks that it is king when it comes to this hand. But in actuality, the thumb, the smallest, yet the most strongest appendage on the hand, is in fact the one that you cannot function without your thumb. I can cut off my index finger and I can still function with my hand, but I cannot cut off my thumb and still get the full use of my hand. So in yoga, we make this gesture to remind us that we have to humble the ego and connect with something greater at all times. And however you define what that greater thing is above and beyond the ego, that is a very personal thing, and that's up to you. But the idea is that you connect with it. So that's what self-realization is. Selfless service. So making the distinction between doing good to be a good human being versus doing the right thing. So when we do good in the world, it makes us feel good, and also sometimes we get a personal gain. You know, we see businesses that get a tax break because they do good in the world, but or it's just the personal gratification. When we start using selfless service to remove ourselves, our own desires and preferences out of the equation, that selfless service turns into doing what is right. And doing what is right isn't always easy, and there's always a great chance for some backlash. And so this is where selfless service becomes more engaging. And it's not about what I think or feel and how I feel about doing it, about feeling good necessarily. I will feel good, but sometimes there might be a little bit of a fire to walk through before I can feel good, in the order to do what is right and to do what is beneficial for others. So it really is a higher moral and ethical ground that we're being called to take. And this comes from within us, and this is engaging, and it's not passive. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there's these restraints they talk about. In yoga, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, sutra is just a word for like a text or rules, if you will. It's not like we've ever, the Western view of rules, like you must and you shall. Rather, these are all doorways for you to practice and experience the benefits, and it will all lead to the same place. But every one of our experiences through these doorways will be very unique but very informative. So these are our teachers. Ahimsa and Satya. So ahimsa, nonviolence. This is Sanskrit. So you're getting a Sanskrit lesson today. Ahimsa means nonviolence, and that was the key factor of both Gandhi and Martin Luther King's work. It was based on nonviolence. And so we say, well, nonviolence, as long as I'm not hitting someone, I'm not a violent person. Wrong. It's so much more than that. Nonviolence is a doorway. It is a path to self-examination, self-realization, self-knowledge, self-discipline. It is something that you are questioning about in myself. where does violence show up? And we're talking the array of violence. So from the most profane of murder, which I hope none of us are murderers, but in fact, we could say that we are, because we move through the world, and inadvertently, just through our existence, we can step on an anthill and we can kill ants, we can kill life. So there's an awareness that even the person who is walking the most disciplined path of ahimsa, that just through sheer existence of this human body and life, through eating food, through drinking, through taking in air, we are going to cause some sort of harm. Our job is to reduce the amount of harm. So we're living by the words, cause no harm to self or others. And we embody that, cause no harm to self or others. And really, it's a self-examination again of, if I say I'm on a peaceful person, but yet I can cuss a barista out because she got my latte order wrong, that's an act of violence. And then one will say, well, I'm only thinking about what I'd like to do to my coworker for, you know, sabotaging this project. I'm not doing it and I'm not speaking it, but thoughts are things, and violent thoughts is still an act of violence. So it's coming right down to where violence begins. It begins in thought form, it's followed by speech, it's followed by action, and it affects our character and how we show up in the world. Satya, truth. So right now we're going through a big truth telling about racial discrimination. These things are coming forward, and stories are being shared, and whether or not you want to believe them, you know, that's up to you. Truth makes us feel uncomfortable quite often. And so both Martin Luther King and Gandhi were on a quest for the truth. They wanted the facts. They wanted to collect as much information, not just about the social issues that are going on, so that they could actually educate people and make change in the world, but that truth also is reflected within. In fact, Gandhi's autobiography was my experiment in truths is what it was. So it's understanding that all of us have to always examine our own personal truths, and if we are living our life in alignment with those truths, or are we denying truth, and in that denying of truth, it's making us cause harm to ourselves and others because we don't want to see something that is within our lives. And so that is a doorway that requires self-examination, self-inquiry, self-discipline, self-realization. So these two are the ones that both Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi worked with. I can't get into the rest now, but aparigraha is non-covetousness, so it's that idea of non-hoarding, non-grasping, or non-attachment to material things. Asteya is non-stealing. So these are interesting things. You think at the surface level, you may think one thing, but when you start to dive deep into the true meaning and how these things show up in every human being, they are within all of us, they just go unchecked, then you'll see that these things need to be challenged within us. Brahmacharya is continence or abstinence. So I'm going to just touch a little bit on this because people think, what, I have to stop having sex if I want to follow, you know, the Gandhi or the Martin Luther path? And the answer is no, that's not it at all. But what it's asking, continence is asking, is to examine sexual appetite. Because if you look at our society, we can say it certainly is an over-sexualized society that then lends itself well to things like pornography, to child trafficking, to exploitation of women and children, to rape. So it's this idea of understanding how those tendencies within us create the world out there and allow certain things to thrive and flourish that are causing harm. So let's talk about Dr. King. He has come up with, based on the methodology, and also remember, Dr. King was a preacher, so he was of a Christian background, which goes to show how secular Vedanta and yoga truly are, because they dovetail into whatever belief system that you have. So what he did is he came up with a way of life and a path, and this is what I'm happening to study right now. These are available at thekingcenter.org. You can go on and you can check them out yourself. But it's the 6 principles of nonviolence, that it is a way of life for courageous people. And why? Because Dr. King says that the nonviolent path is aggressive, mentally, emotionally, and physically aggressive on people. And people think that the peaceful path is actually such an easy path. I'll ask you this question: which is easier, to hate your enemies or love them? Which is easier, to negatively criticize your shortcomings, or to radically love them? So it is a courageous path. It is challenging. It's a very challenging path. It seeks to win friendship and understanding. So this is not about shaming. This path is about educating and speaking to the conscience of people, not to the emotions, and also speaking from your conscience, not from your emotions. So it's a path that trains you how to manage your own triggers and not react from those places, but to sit in that discomfort and then be able to respond and move forward with wisdom. It seeks to defeat injustice, not people. As the saying goes, hate the sin, not the sinner. Or hate the game, not the player. So you have to be able to make the distinction between what you are going after. Dr. King, and it's true, is that once you understand through self-examination all of the untruths that are in there about who you are and how you're supposed to be in the world, and then you debunk those truths, you can start to see that other people are simply the victims of wrong thinking. They're the victims of conditioning. They're the victims of stories that they have adopted as their own unknowingly, and they live from those untruths. So we have to go in and we want to defeat the untruths. It holds that unearned suffering can educate and transform. So there we go to selfless service again. That idea that when you do the right thing, there might be backlash. There is this fearlessness that because it's serving a higher and greater good, that it's worth the consequence. So this is why Martin Luther King told everybody, you know, if you get arrested, recognize, because we are standing up against unjust laws, that it's still a law. Even though it's unjust, it is still a law in the books, which means that we will be arrested. So therefore, but know that your arrest will be redeemed, because it's unjust. So go to jail for that because it's worth it, essentially, is what he's saying. Or the idea that through human suffering, that sometimes people experience physical pain. So we can take the extreme example of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd was the catalyst for great change. The global movement started. So it wasn't in vain. Why? Because his death was unjust. So, which also kind of speaks to the last point, which is that the nonviolent path believes that the universe is on the side of justice. And so when you study Eastern wisdom, you know that there's some universal laws such as the law of cause and effect, which is what karma is based on. That for every cause, there is an effect. If there's a positive cause, there will be a positive effect. If there is a negative cause, there will be a negative effect. It is undisputable. So whether or not we live to see the justice, there is an energy, there is a universal law that holds justice and will take care of it. And we put trust in that at a certain time and place, justice will be served. Just as right now, you think about slavery, right now we're coming to a place as humanity where we're saying that that was never okay. And we're coming to a place in humanity where we're saying that race was never okay. Justice in this moment is being served. It was a dream for people way back when that never got to live to see this moment. But the justice is being served because the universe supports what is right, and there has been injustice happened within the human family that needs to be corrected. And also the nonviolent path chooses love instead of hate. It is a heart-centered path. So this really is a way of life that is to be adopted. So the next question is, how do we get started? So heart-centered living, again, so if you wake up and you commit to nonviolence in every aspect of your life, when nobody's looking, that you choose your words, your actions in a way that speak of nonviolence, of peace. True peace, love, and compassion are born out of nonviolence. It's transformative. That you are committed to truth, to non-covetousness, so non-hoarding, non-grasping, non-materialism. You can enjoy these things, but don't define or withhold resources or even information. Continence, that you are committed to justice and reconciliation is a big part of this path as well. That you are always trying to swing back around and bring everybody in and to be on good terms and good understanding, and that you hold the space for others and deep care for others at all times, that you want every human being to thrive. No discrimination, not one human being over another, but all human beings. And that this heart-centered living is for yourself as much as it is for others. So those of us in the social justice path or social activism, we're givers. So we always think about other people. And this path reminds us that it's just as much for you as it is for others. So you have to be there and show up for yourself as much as you show up for others. It's mindful living. So it starts with me. It starts with you, it starts with you, it starts with you, it starts with every single one of us. It really is becoming the change we wish to see in the world. It goes through self-examination, self-discipline, self-realization, and selfless service. So how do we do this? I'm going to send these questions, Michelle, to you. I'm going to send all of these, actually this whole presentation, I'll send the notes from it so that everybody can have them. But these are guiding questions. For example, how often am I at peace? In what ways am I violent? And so again, being honest. So that's that truthfulness part. Looking at yourself and saying, in what ways am I aggressive, hurtful, disrespectful? Any which way that suggests that I'm harming or hurtful in thought, speech, and action. Is my inner dialogue respectful, loving, and compassionate at all times? How do you speak to yourself? And especially when we're under stress or when things aren't turning out the way that we want, how do we speak to ourselves? So that relationship and that nonviolence approach is just as important to ourselves as it is to others. How often are my relationships at peace? And in which way does violence in all the forms flourish in my relationships as thoughts, words, and actions. So starting with your family, what is allowed to flourish or go unchecked that speaks to violence? Anti-racism guiding questions. So what is the truth about how the false narrative of race has shaped the lives of those who it was intended to benefit? What is the truth? And what is the truth of how it has shaped the lives of those it was intended to oppress? These are questions we need to dive deep into. Those first questions here, I won't get into today because these are sensitive and we don't have the time to take the care and compassion and space needed to fully address these and make sure that we all come out of that on a good spot. So that's something for you to investigate on your own. But this last one, how will my community feel, look, sound when humans finally see each other as belonging to the same family tree? And how can I start the process of remembering and reuniting now? So I'd like to go into breakout groups. So action steps, first I recommend doing it individually because you have to experience these things before you can share them with others. But you can share them, do them first with yourself, then you can challenge your family, you can challenge friends, you can challenge your colleagues and your teams. 30-day violence detox. So I will send what that can look like as well over to Michelle. Speak the language of human family, not race. Learn about racism and anti-racism in the nation, province, city, both past and present. Connect, listen, share, and discuss with others. So right association, associating with like-minded people who are also on this path. Part of the reason why we can't think that this vision can happen is probably you haven't been able to tap into communities who are working truly on that vision and living in that vision right now. And I can say that I have tapped into many communities. So this is why I know that this is a reality because people are living this way already. And so you need to start tapping into those communities. Create, attend in internal and external safe educational and knowledge exchange spaces to explore inherent race-based obstacles in organizational structure and systems. So whether that's creating symposiums, bird of a feather dinners or luncheons, you know, coming in and talking about certain topics, conferences, we need to start collecting and creating spaces where these discussions can happen in a safe and learning environment, and one that promotes understanding and reconciliation. Notice and course correct when favoring or imposing yours or a dominant preference and or perspective. So really all this is about is that all this time we have been subscribing to a dominant preference and perspective, which has been based on patriarchal white supremacy. So that has affected so much. And we now need to realize that there are other perspectives and preferences in the world, and actually probably ones that are less damaging as well. So we need to start reaching for those, but also being open for the diverse perspectives and preferences that every human being has. Requirements for mindful living: humility, vulnerability, deep listening, sitting in discomfort. This is not a comfortable path, people. It is very uncomfortable, but you learn how to manage that and to move to the other side of it, because that's where all the gold is. It requires patience, persistence, creativity, decisiveness. So just to say I'm not racist isn't enough. You're going to have to make sure that if it comes by you or near you, that it doesn't go past you. So it's a matter of, it's not getting by me. Kaizen, that's a Japanese word for continual improvement. We need to have a commitment to continual improvement. This is not a 1 week, a 1 month, a 1 year thing. This is a lifelong journey. Positive association, as I meant. You need to start meeting with the right people who can support that greater vision and who are living it. This also is very small. I'm going to send this to you, but it is a list of all the podcasts, documentaries, and TED Talks that I have listened to. I have books. I haven't finished reading them, so I don't feel comfortable passing things that I have not yet read myself. But I know there's a great book list out there that people are highly recommending. But certainly these podcasts, which I will send to Michelle, are great starting points to learn more. Homework. If you haven't already, which I'm assuming you already have, looked into Indian residential schools, big deal. Indian Act of 1876, Africville of Nova Scotia, slavery in Canada. We had slavery here for 200 years. And not only that, we had slaves that escaped from Canada to Vermont because there was no slavery in Vermont. Just a fun fact. Nobody told us that. Interracial couple racism in Canada, Chinese head tax in Canada, Japanese internment camps in Canada, racism and Sikhs in Canada. And then also compare our timelines with what was happening in the United States, and you might find some interesting things. So we're not so innocent as we think we are. And I know I've run out of time. I've gone over, I apologize. I don't have time for, unless you say I do, for questions and answers.
Well,
I'll leave that up to
Chantelle,
you.
yeah, thank you so much. I have time to stay on, so I know people, you may have other meetings and commitments, but before you go, huge thank you for, putting the time into to pulling this together in a way that was so thoughtful, that shared part of your own personal story, but as well, provides us with more to think about and to and then resources on how to carry on that learning and unlearning.